Practice makes perfect and no days off are the dumbest mantra you can teach to a young athlete, and today we're going to talk about why.
I don't want to hear you, 'cause you cannot master the stress.
Welcome back to Strength Coach Rants. I'm your host, Connor Lyons, and today we're going to be talking about year-round sports and youth sports specialization. That's a mouthful. I've written about this pretty extensively in the past. I'll post some links, or I'll link some links in the description of the podcast on the YouTube channel to the various articles I've written about how detrimental both of these things can be. But I thought it's perfect time of year, right? It's start of the summer. This is supposed to be your off season if you are an athlete, for like the vast majority of athletes, although this just means now for most people that it is time to play summer league, right? Football even, right? You've got 7-on-7s all summer long. You've got football teams conditioning for a season that doesn't start until August and September. Baseball has summer baseball, where I'll argue these kids' schedules are probably worse now than they are during the high school year. I have more problems working around the various baseball players that I have in my gym, working around their schedules right now than I do when they're playing high school ball. Hockey has all these camps, and like I've got a kid that plays in the Ontario League, and he's got NHL like prospect camps will be coming up. He's actually out of town right now, up where he plays, having to get on the ice some. Basketball has summer, like high school basketball right now. Like everybody is still playing sports because we've decided as a culture that we have to specialize and we have to play year round if we're going to make it, right? So brings me to my next point. Like, why are we specializing in these sports? This wasn't always the case, but it has been for probably the past 10 to 15 years. And the reason for that is money. These sports organizations and these coaches want your money. We're going to go over some of the data in a little bit here, but there's absolutely no data to suggest that playing sports year-round is anything like beneficial to outcomes here. Actually, in complete, like on the, what's the word I'm looking for here? Completely to the contrary, every bit of data that we has shows that it's detrimental both emotionally, mentally, physically, all of it. There's like actually no good that comes from playing sports year round. So the reasons why we are specializing, money for one, right? It's become an industry. It's become a business. It's become like a $20 billion business here in the United States. And then FOMO, right? So parents have been convinced, as have kids, that if they're not playing their sport year round, they're going to be left behind because, the 10,000 hour rule rears its ugly head yet again. And we've been convinced that you need 10,000 hours of deliberate practice in order to become great or an expert at anything. And that's absolutely not the case whatsoever. I did an episode, and I'll link in the description here, on the 10,000 hour rule and how it's complete nonsense. The title of the episode is actually "The 10,000 Hour Rule is Complete Bullshit." And I forget the rest of it, but that's essentially what it is. I'll link it in the description. And I talk pretty extensively about the study that Malcolm Gladwell used to push that narrative, right? It was a study by, I think he was a Swedish dude named Ericsson, who followed these high-level musicians throughout their schooling and into their professional lives. The 10,000 hour rule actually wasn't a thing that came from that study. That was something that Gladwell took a pretty big leap and decided that 10,000 hours, there's no basis for it, that was the rule. Because it sounded better, I guess, than like the 6,000 hour rule or the 7,000 hour rule. So now we have everybody believing that you need 10,000 hours to be good at anything or to be great at anything. And it's simply not the case. There's a book called The Sports Gene. It's written by a guy named David Epstein. And it is actually like the flip side of every single thing that Gladwell talks about in that book. And it deals with like your genetic structure and how that is really how people become great. It is mostly genetics and not so much hard work, although hard work is still very important. But he's actually got a titled chapter in the book called 10,000 Hour Rule, give or take 10,000 hours. And it talks about all of these people who are able to pick up these skills very quickly and then excel and become great at something. Not that I played at the highest levels of play, but I didn't start playing travel hockey till I was 17 years old, and I ended up playing at the NCAA level, right? I played with and against guys that had been playing since they were six. And a lot of those guys didn't make it nearly as far as I did. And some of it was because my parents had the foresight to stick me in things like gymnastics and allow me to play every single sport. But a lot of it was that I didn't like specialize in a sport at all until I was like very mature and I spent some time in the gym becoming an athlete. So the 10,000 hour rule is nonsense. So if you have FOMO about your kid not making it because they're missing out and they need those 10,000 hours, go ahead and put those worries away because they're unnecessary. But those are really the two big reasons why we specialize is money and FOMO. So if we can get past the FOMO, then hopefully I can convince you here not to give these organizations your money in the off season when your kid should be resting. And we're going to talk about all that now. So earlier I said that we have no data to suggest that it is a net positive for you to play sports year round, but that we have a ton of data to suggest otherwise. And I'm going to kind of go into some of that now. So one of the probably best reads that I've ever come across when it comes to this is Tom Myslinski, who's a strength and conditioning coach in the NFL and at the NCAA level for a fairly long time, wrote his thesis when he was in college. I think that's what this is. It was called The Development of the Russian Conjugate Sequencing System. And it's a great read, and it talks a lot about like transfer trainingness, and it talks a lot about like youth specialization and how detrimental it can be. I'll link that in the website on the page for this episode, so you might have to go digging if you're because I'll upload it to my website. Might have to go dig it if you want to read it, but if you're a strength and conditioning coach, I implore you to read this. It is the foundation for a lot of the coaching that I do comes from readings like this one, and they're just not very well known. I'm going to pull up a graphic from that. There we go. All right, so these are the differences between what we call a multilateral program. That's where you're playing multiple sports throughout the year and or just taking time away from the sport and you're not playing year round and you're not specializing like in a given position or in a given sport. So if you're not watching and you're just listening, it's a chart here and there's a left and a right and it kind of compares two different things. I'll go over it so you won't be too lost here. All right, but on the early specialization side, these are some of the things that you can expect to kind of come across. Performance improvements are usually pretty immediate, right? That sounds like a good thing, but it's not. And we'll talk about that. Best performances typically come between the ages of 15 and 16 because of that early adaptation, and we'll talk about like why that's the case. Performance inconsistencies within competitions, we'll talk about that as well. By 18, most athletes like quit. They'll burn out or they're done. And that forced adaptation accounts for like a very high rate of injury, right? And on the flip side, the multilateral program, performance improvements tend to be continuous, right? Because they're not forced and they're not early. Best performances are over the age of 18 due to the physical and mental maturation of the athlete when they decide to start specializing in any given sport. Performance consistencies within competitions, we'll go over that in a minute. After 18, many athletes start to quote unquote come into their own. And the gradual adaptation accounted for a lower rate of injuries. I don't know if you guys can hear this, but my dog's snoring right now. And it's driving me a little nuts. Hopefully it's not getting all the way to the mic here. All right, so performance improvements were immediate. And that sounds like it'd be a great thing, right? We want those immediate improvements. Well, that's how it works with anything, right? So if I were to go outside and go run a mile every day, within like 2 or 3 days, I would be running a pretty good mile, right? I would feel pretty good. It would be much better than the first time I ran it. And I would run a mile better than anyone who's never run a mile before who was slightly out of shape and overweight. The reason for that is because I force myself to adapt to that by doing it over and over again. Now, if I continue doing that for too long, I'm going to end up with some kind of overuse injury, right? And that's what happens with a lot of these kids. We'll talk about that at the very end of this. And so on the flip side of that, that's the performance improvements are continuous, right? With somebody who doesn't specialize at quite a young age. You're going to get to the same place, right? It's just going to take you a little bit longer. That's not necessarily a bad thing when we're talking about 9, 10, 11, 12-year-olds. Best performances are between 15 and 16 because of this early adaptation, right? So, what is 15 and 16 for most kids? That's like kind of like right in the heat of puberty, right? And the reason why they have their best performances before this age is because none of those other kids have matured, right? So now when you're 15, 16, you've got some of these kids that have matured, right? And they've got like not quite the same skill set, but they're a little bit more athletic, right? And they surpass these kids who started specializing at a young age because now they are as big or faster, stronger, and all those things. They have now caught up from a skill set perspective to the kid who specialized at like 9, 10, 11, 12 years old. Performance inconsistencies within competition. And a lot of that's just due to the fact that a lot of times they're dealing with some kind of overuse. They're dealing with being burnout. They're dealing with like just not really knowing if their heart's in it anymore. That's really the reason for that. By 18, many athletes quit or burn out and or this isn't mentioned here, hate their parents for making them play a sport that they didn't really like all that much. um, it's just from continuously playing a sport, you get tired of it. If I dedicate the entirety of my life right to a sport and I sacrifice a lot of things and I don't make it to like the highest level, by the time I'm 18 I get to college and I'm like, oh man, like there's girls, man, there's partying, man, there's this, there's that. Like a lot of kids are just going to quit. I saw it happen all the time at Saddlebrook when I was a strength and conditioning coach there. All these kids that went to this academy for like 4, 5, 6, 7 years, when they got to college, they'd play one season of tennis and then they'd quit. Very common, just because they're completely burned out. The forced adaptations account for a high rate of injuries, and that's like 100% the case. We deal with so many overuse, even like some catastrophic overuse type stuff. You look at Tommy John surgery, right? The average age of somebody dealing with and getting a Tommy John surgery for a UCL repair is 15, 16 years old. 15, 16. That used to be, so Tommy John, the guy who originally got it in his early mid 30s because he had blown out his arm. Now we've got kids doing the same thing at 15, 16 years old. That is a problem. Kind of to piggyback on the best performances between the ages of 15 and 16, I'm going to pull up a video here of a guy named Dave Tate. He's the owner of Elite FTS, and he kind of puts this completely into perspective, and it makes a lot of sense. So I'm gonna play that now.
The late matures are the ones that generally are going to end up at the higher level. So the kids that aren't making the team in junior high, they're going to be, if they stay, the best in high school. The only reason the people that are playing in junior high is because they mature faster. All right, what generally happens, and the takeaway is, the kids that aren't playing, that are sitting the bench, usually what the coaches do is, we'll just go over there and skill. And then the coaches are taking the more mature athletes, skill. And then the coaches are taking the more mature.
Sorry, I clicked on something I shouldn't have. What he said was, actually, I'll just go all the way back so you can hear it.
Go over there, push the sled. Go over there and work on your drills. They're doing skill. And then the coaches are.
And he's talking about the kids who are not as mature at a young age. They're the kids that are doing skill.
Taking the more mature athlete who's stronger and faster and saying, hey, let's run this play. Well, that works really good until those kids over there mature. And now they're just as strong and just as fast, but they got one other thing, skills. That's why you see the great junior high player never even play in high school. They're the ones smoking crack on the corner, because they got blown away. And people will say, man, I don't know what happened to him. He was awesome when he was younger. Well, what happened is he never had the skill development. So human potential is a lot higher than what we think it is.
So that's kind of him putting into words what I was trying to say earlier. I'll bring that little slide back up. Whoops, wrong one. Yeah. About best performances being between the ages of 15 and 16, right? Because the kids who tend to be very good at a very young age are the kids who have physically matured just a little bit earlier than the rest of the kids. And if they are not also being taught how to play that sport and how to like develop a skill set and hone a skill set, they're going to get blown away by the time, those other kids catch up and go through puberty and mature. So that was the detrimental side effects, the most well-known, most well-understood ones when it comes to early sports specialization and playing sports year round, right? To piggyback on top of the last thing that I had mentioned, which was the injury rates, you can imagine if you're doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over again for years on end, all the time, you're possibly gonna get fatigued at some point, possibly get out of position at some point, and possibly develop some kind of overuse injury. It happens. You look at people, how often, oh man, I'm trying to think. The people listening to this probably aren't old enough to remember this, but like 20-ish years ago, everybody was getting like carpal tunnel syndrome, so they were having to get surgery, and that's because we had just really gotten deep into everybody having a computer and being on a computer all the time at work. And because they were doing the same things over and over and over and over again, they developed what is essentially an overuse injury from having a desk job. And so you could imagine playing a sport, it is amplified to the nth degree. So you end up with overuse injuries and, you know, uh, catastrophic injuries as well, not just like the tendonitis and that. You end up with ACL tears, you end up with UCL tears, you end up with all kinds of issues because you decided to play one sport and play it year round, because you are hitting the same movement patterns over and over and over again. Which is why it's great to play multiple sports, not all at the same time, but play multiple sports. One more thing about the detrimental effects of specialization. The NCAA did a study back in 2018, and this may have changed for the worse at this point because we are 6 years later. The NCAA showed that upwards of slightly over 30% of NCAA athletes dealt with depression or bouts of depression throughout the year. And what was really wild about that is higher than the average, like general population student at the school or at these NCAA universities. So, you know, we're putting our kids in a position to be possibly more depressed. And what that's from, I don't know that they know for sure, but a lot of it is just the stress of having to perform all the time. And if these NCAA athletes who are a little bit older and a little bit more mature are dealing with this, imagine what your 12, 13, 14-year-old is dealing with when it comes to, depression and anxiety from playing like just one sport and having all of your eggs in one basket and all that. And there's a lot of data to suggest that kids that specialize and play year round also deal with anxiety and depression at a higher rate. I'll link in the description a video of John Deloney explaining that, because it's sadly common. So we're talking about the mental health of your child, the physical health of your child, it all being detrimental playing this sport year round. So like, give your head a shake if your kid's playing right now and they shouldn't be. Next thing we're going to talk about here is the costs. All right, so we're not going to get too deep into the weeds here with the costs. I did an entire episode on this. I'll link that in the description as well. I've done a lot of episodes that kind of all congregate into this one about, it's called You Spend How Much on Youth Sports, and it's about how much money families spend on youth sports. And it is bizarre how much money gets dropped on youth sports when the outcomes don't dictate that that's the best idea. But here's just a few bullet points. 20% of all American families spend more than $20K a year on their children's sports. That's 20% of all families, not sports families, all families. That's a lot of money. 67% of that 20%, they hope that the investment will turn into a college scholarship. So hope, the study didn't say, or the survey rather, didn't say that they think, it said that they hoped. So take that with a grain of salt. It may not be that they're delusional enough to believe that they think it's going to work. Maybe they hope it does, and that's okay. You can hope. 34% of those parents believe that their kid. I'm sorry. Let me rewind here. 34% of that 20% said that they believe their kid is destined to be a pro or an Olympian. So kind of insane. 34% of 20% is still way too high of a number when it comes to pros and Olympians in sport. And it's just not feasible. Your kid might be phenomenal, but they are also probably more than likely like the 99.999% of other kids who will more than likely not become a pro or an Olympian. And that's more than okay. I kind of made fun of the college scholarship, right? But there is money for kids when it comes to sports in school. Like there really is. It doesn't have to be a full ride. I guess what I laugh at is when parents think their kid is destined to get a full ride. So just and it's in this video, this other episode that I'll link here if you decide to watch it. It's actually really pretty interesting episode. Lots of information in it. Only 1% of all NCAA athletes are on a full ride, right? There are a little over 550,000 NCAA athletes, and less than like 5,200 of them are on a full ride, a quote unquote full ride. And the vast majority of those athletes are basketball and football. So if a full ride is what your wish is, give your head a shake because it's probably not going to happen for you. So the costs are insane. And again, that goes back to why we're specializing uh, because parents think that there's going to be this payoff on the back end, almost like an investment. I spend 20 grand a year now, but it pays back in millions down the road. And it's just not going to happen for the vast majority of people. And that doesn't mean that you can't be successful and you can't play at a relatively high level. Like my high level was Division III NCAA hockey, and I was fine with that. Would I have loved to have been good enough to be a pro? Absolutely. But I got to wear an NCAA sweater, and that just not that many kids get to do that. So if your kid has aspirations of playing in college, that is an awesome thing. If you as a parent have aspirations of your kid getting a full ride, no, no. So if the emotional, the financial, and the physical detriments aren't enough for you, now we're going to talk about what are called the phases of processes. So what youth sports specialization does and year-round sports do to the process of learning is absolutely warps it, destroys it. Not even including, we're not even going over what the LTAD model says when it comes to development. We're talking about just the phases of learning and how it actually works and how you develop like a lifelong love of something. That we completely destroy when we talk about youth sports here. So those phases are the romance phase, the precision phase, and the integration phase. They've got some other names that I've seen here and there, but this is how we're going to kind of list them here. And if you are watching, I've got this little graphic here. If you're not watching, you're not going to see the graphic, but basically what it does is it shows the phases. Now this is when it comes to learning, right? And playing sports is really learning. You're learning movement skill, you're learning skills, various skills. You're learning mentally how to function in that sport. So it is a learning process. That's what sports are. Um, but we're going to start off with the romance phase. Now, what the youth sports business model does today is it totally eliminates this romance phase, right? This is where you learn to fall in love with the sport, right? It's where you like you learn to figure it out. You get out there and you have fun. You go play with your friends out in the street. You go to a pickup hockey game. You go to a pickup basketball game. Back in the day, you'd go play baseball in the sandlot, or you'd play stickball in the street. You know what I mean? Like that's the romance phase, is like getting to know the sport and getting to love it and learning how to figure a couple things here and there out on your own. Learning to ask questions, not necessarily from a coach, but like, oh, like, how do I do this? How do I do that? I want to get better at this, right? Asking those questions and discovering ways to kind of do things on your own. It's the process of unstructured play where you get to figure it out and you get to figure like your love for this game out as well. Following that romance phase that we absolutely do not even entertain being in for very long, if we are in it at all, is the precision phase. Now, this is where you start to kind of have some guided coaching. You learn to listen to the coach's explanation of things. You learn to construct explanations for the experiences that you had during the romance phase. Like this happened, and you can find out why this happened and how I can maybe do it better next time. You learn more about it. You start to kind of write and remember info, right? Maybe now you start taking notes, even if they're mental notes on, ways to maneuver on the ice, or, how to do a pick and roll in basketball, or, the best position, when you go to swing, things like that. You start to kind of learning on your own in addition to learning with a coach, right? And then we have the integration phase. The integration phase is applying concepts to new situations, right? That's like taking a drill I did in practice and, whoa, this happened on the field. Now I know what to do. working in a self-regulated manner, meaning kind of pushing yourself. Now you are, you're integrated into the sport here, and you are now able to kind of push yourself because you care enough, right? And you're good enough to be able to do that. Working as a team is all part of this as well. And that doesn't mean that you can't work as a team like in the other phases, but that's like a big part of this process in this phase. Connecting connecting with your own experiences as opposed to like relying on a coach. So now like something happens in a game, I know like, okay, well, this happened. I don't need a coach to tell me exactly what to do. I can just kind of react, right? That's within the integration phase. So, like I said, we totally skip over this romance or exploration phase here in America when it comes to youth sports specialization. And what that has led to is most kids, 70% of them end up quitting some kind of sport by the age of 13, right? That doesn't mean that they'll never play a sport again, but that means that they no longer want to play this sport, right? So if I jump in and I want to play soccer, right, and I don't just get to go out and like kick the ball and have fun, and I am immediately in drill, that's not fun. I don't need to get better at this sport like that when I'm 6, 7, 8 years old. I need to learn the fundamentals, but I need to have fun first and foremost if I'm going to continue playing this game. And sadly, we don't do that. It's not fun. It is drill, it is skill, and it is driving kids away from the sport. So, like I said, I don't want to jump into the whole LTAD model and how we've inverted and destroyed that. But the phases of processes, we've absolutely skipped over phase one, and we are expecting kids, right, to just jump into the precision integration phases where we are skill, drill, coach telling you what to do all the time, right? That doesn't make for a very fun sport, and that's why we have, according to the data, 70% of kids quitting a sport before the age of 13. All right. So I'm going to wrap this up here. Relatively quick one today. There's a lot of detriments to playing sports year round. There's physical, right? We're talking about overuse injury. We're talking about catastrophic stuff because you're fatigued. There's emotional issues that come with it, as the NCAA found. There is a financial cost to this. And one thing we didn't really go over today is like, and John Deloney said this, and it hit home in the craziest way because I never had anybody explain this to me. Like, you're allowing your 9-year-old kid's hobby to dictate the entirety of your family. They dictate where you go on vacation sometimes. They're going to dictate what time you leave the house. They're going to dictate what time you get home at the end of your day. They're going to dictate what time you're eating dinner. They're going to dictate what their sibling is doing throughout the day. And that is not going to make for a very healthy adult down the road, right? So all the reasons listed: financial costs, family costs, physical and emotional costs, right? We're destroying the phases of learning, all that stuff. And I'm going to link, like I said, about 1 billion things in the description here. But also, let me go buy one of these, all right? The Dynamic Effort Method for Athletes. It's a great read. It's like an hour and a half. I wrote it. It's my face on the back of the book. Go check it out. We've also got Simple Strength. I'll link both of those in the description. It's an easy read. That one's only on ebook. But if you're struggling to find a way to like organize your training, it is a simple, stupid, easy, effective way to organize your training. We go over it all in that book. The Dynamic Effort Method for Athletes is probably better for you if you're a strength and conditioning coach looking to get the most out of your athletes. Other than that, I think that's it for today. Hope everybody learned something. If you have any questions, reach out with the contact info inside the description box here on the YouTubes, or check out the website at www.dldsp as in lionsdensportsperformance.com. There's a plethora of articles and podcast episodes and videos, and I'm actually like creating a big exercise database and some courses on there. I don't know that they're going to be done by the end of the summer because I'm busy right now. But we're always adding to the website. There's always new cool stuff that you can read. Some of it deals with like fitness and strength and performance, and some of it deals with like cultural stuff. So there's a lot of fun stuff on there. I think that's it. I always suck at wrapping these things up. So we'll just say, hope everybody has a good rest of your week, and we'll see you next time.
I don't want to hear you, 'cause you cannot master the